The morning alarm on Kepler station rang with its usual synthetic cheerfulness, but Ambassador Sarah Chen barely heard it over her daughter's sobbing. 8-year-old Emma sat cross-legged on the floor of their diplomatic quarters, clutching a worn leather collar that still smelled faintly of the companion who should have been wearing it. "He was right here when I went to sleep," Emma whispered through her tears, her small fingers tracing the name tag that read Buster in both Human Standard and Galactic Common. "I always check the door locks twice, just like you taught me." Sarah knelt beside her daughter, fighting back her own surge of panic. Buster wasn't just a pet to Emma, he was her anchor in a universe that seemed too big and too strange for a child who'd spent most of her life moving between space stations and alien worlds. The golden retriever had been with them since Emma was 3, a constant source of comfort during the long diplomatic missions that kept them far from Earth. "We'll find him, sweetheart," Sarah said, though her mind was already racing through the implications. Kepler station housed over 50 different species, many of whom had dietary preferences that didn't align with humanity's definition of companion animal. The massive trading hub sprawled across 17 levels, with countless maintenance tunnels, cargo bays, and restricted areas where a confused dog could easily disappear forever. Sarah activated her personal communicator with practiced efficiency. "This is Ambassador Chen requesting immediate assistance from station security. Priority level, personal emergency." The response came within moments, delivered in the flat, mechanical tone that marked Kepler station's AI. "Ambassador Chen, Station Security Chief Vorthak will respond within standard time parameters. Estimated arrival, 47 standard minutes." 47 minutes? Sarah's diplomatic training cracked slightly. "I need someone now." "Regulations require," Sarah cut the connection with more force than necessary. 47 minutes might as well be 47 years when your daughter's best friend was loose on a station where some species considered Earth canines a delicacy. She opened her secure communication channel to Earth Command, her fingers moving with muscle memory born from years of crisis management. "Earth Command, this is Ambassador Chen on Kepler station. I need to speak with Admiral Morrison immediately." The comm officer on duty, a young man whose face Sarah vaguely recognized, looked confused. "Ambassador, the Admiral is in a council meeting with the Joint Chiefs." "Unless this is a matter of galactic security, it is," Sarah said without hesitation. "My daughter's companion animal has gone missing on Kepler station. I'm invoking Protocol 7 under the Dependent Protection Clause." The comm officer's confusion deepened. Protocol 7 was typically reserved for terrorist attacks or alien invasions, not missing pets. But diplomatic protocols existed for a reason, and Sarah Chen's reputation for level-headed judgment preceded her. If she was invoking Protocol 7, she had reasons. "One moment, Ambassador." Admiral Morrison's weathered face filled the screen within minutes, his expression already shifting from annoyance to concern as he took in Sarah's controlled desperation. Behind him, Sarah could see the edges of the Situation Room where humanity's highest military officials conducted their most sensitive operations. "Sarah, what's the situation?" "Admiral, my daughter's dog is missing on Kepler station. 8-year-old Emma Chen, dependent of a diplomatic mission representative, has suffered the loss of her registered companion animal in potentially hostile territory." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. He understood the game Sarah was playing, wrapping a personal crisis in official language to trigger humanity's most protective instincts. But, more than that, he understood what most aliens didn't, that humans would move mountains for their children, and anything those children loved became part of the family by extension. "Understood, Ambassador. What do you need?" "I need to find Buster before." Sarah glanced at Emma, who was listening with the intense focus that children brought to adult conversations about their world. "Before the situation becomes irreversible." Morrison nodded grimly. He'd served on enough alien worlds to understand the implications. "Consider it done. I'm authorizing a full deployment under the Missing Persons Protocol. Captain Rodriguez will coordinate from the Devastator." Sarah felt a moment of genuine shock. The UES Devastator was humanity's newest dreadnought, currently stationed in the Kepler system as part of a routine patrol. She'd expected perhaps a squad of Marines, not the full battle group. "Admiral, that might be excessive for a missing pet." Morrison's expression hardened. Ambassador, there are no missing pets in my command. There are missing family members. The deployment stands. Across the station, alarms began to sound. Not the general quarters klaxon that would indicate an attack, but the steady, purposeful tone that meant humanity's military was mobilizing. In the diplomatic quarter, Ambassador Chen held her daughter close and wondered if she'd just started an interstellar incident over a golden retriever. She decided she didn't care. Captain Elena Rodriguez received the deployment orders while reviewing supply manifests in her ready room aboard the Devastator. The initial request seemed so unusual that she had her communications officer verify the authorization codes twice before accepting it as genuine. Captain, her first officer, Commander Hayes, spoke over the intercom with barely contained confusion. We're receiving mobilization orders for a search and rescue operation? For a dog? Rodriguez studied the mission parameters on her personal display. Emma Chen, age 8, daughter of Ambassador Sarah Chen. One missing companion animal, species Canis lupus familiaris, breed golden retriever, name Buster. Last seen in diplomatic quarters on Kepler Station at approximately 0200 station time. Commander, please report to my ready room immediately. Hayes arrived within minutes, his expression a mixture of professional composure and personal bewilderment. Captain, I've reviewed the orders 3 times. Admiral Morrison has authorized full battlegroup deployment for a missing dog. This has to be some kind of mistake. Rodriguez gestured for him to sit. Commander, how long have you served under human command? 15 years, Captain. Since the Academy. And, in those 15 years, have you ever known Admiral Morrison to make mistakes about deployment orders? Hayes considered this carefully. Morrison was legendary for his precision and strategic thinking. Officers who questioned his orders typically found themselves transferred to less desirable positions, usually after events proved the admiral correct in ways they hadn't anticipated. No, Captain. But this seems unprecedented? Rodriguez smiled grimly. Commander, do you have children? 2 daughters, Captain. Ages 6 and 9. And, if one of your daughters lost something precious to her on an alien station filled with potential predators, what would you want your commanding officers to do? Understanding dawned on Hayes's face. Everything possible, Captain. Exactly. But, more than that, Commander, this isn't just about one little girl and her dog. This is about what humanity stands for. We've built our reputation in this galaxy on one simple principle: we protect our own. All of our own. Even the ones with 4 legs and floppy ears. Rodriguez activated her ship's communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We have received mobilization orders for immediate deployment to Kepler Station. Our mission is search and rescue. We have a missing family member who needs to come home. Throughout the ship, crew members exchanged glances. Veterans of the Zephyrian War and the Centauri crisis found themselves preparing for what might be the most unusual deployment of their careers. But orders were orders, and Captain Rodriguez's tone made it clear that this mission would be conducted with the same professionalism and dedication as any other. Engineering, I want maximum efficiency from the drives. Navigation, plot a course for Kepler Station, best possible time. Communications, send word to the Thunderbolt, Relentless, and Indomitable full battle group formation, departure in 30 minutes. Captain, Hayes said quietly, the other species on Kepler Station are going to think we've lost our minds. Rodriguez's smile was sharp with anticipation. Commander, they're about to learn something important about human priorities. We don't abandon family. Ever. Back on Kepler Station, word of humanity's mobilization spread through the diplomatic channels with the speed of a solar wind. In the Zephyrian embassy, Ambassador Kethrak received the news with the 4-armed equivalent of a human raising an eyebrow. They're deploying how many ships? He asked his aide. Initial reports suggest the entire 7th Battle Group, Excellence. For capital ships, 12 destroyers, and supporting vessels. Approximately 800,000 human military personnel.
Kethrak's translator struggled with the concept before settling on something close to bewilderment.
The Zephyrians were a practical species, given to measured responses and calculated risks. The idea of deploying a fleet capable of conquering star systems to find a single missing animal struck them as either brilliant psychological warfare or complete insanity.
Have the humans declared war on someone?
Kethrak asked.
No, Excellence.
They appear to be looking for a small quadruped belonging to Ambassador Chen's offspring. In the Crystalline Collective's embassy, the news created what might charitably be called harmonic dissonance among the silicon-based entities. They communicated through carefully modulated frequency patterns, and the concept of emotional attachment to non-sentient biological entities created feedback loops in their translation matrices. Query: military deployment parameters exceed threat assessment by factor of 10,000.
Explanation requested. Response: humans appear to value individual emotional attachments over strategic logic. Assessment: this confirms intelligence reports regarding human unpredictability quotient. The Corthanian delegation, predatory reptilians who respected strength above all else, had a different interpretation entirely. Their military attaché, a scarred veteran named Sathek, studied the deployment reports with growing admiration. They project force to protect their young, he hissed to his subordinates. This is the behavior of apex predators defending their nesting grounds. The humans understand what truly matters, the continuation of the bloodline through protection of genetic investment. What none of the alien delegations fully grasped was that humanity's response had very little to do with strategic thinking and everything to do with an 8-year-old girl crying over an empty dog bed. They saw military deployment where humans saw family crisis response. They calculated threat assessments where humans felt protective fury. Sarah Chen, sitting with Emma in their diplomatic quarters while station security finally began their thorough investigation, monitored the communications traffic with growing amazement. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace in the Kepler system every few minutes, their transponders identifying them as human military vessels responding to emergency deployment orders. "Mommy," Emma said, looking up from the datapad where she'd been scrolling through pictures of Buster, "why are all those ships coming here?" Sarah struggled to find words that would explain humanity's response without terrifying her daughter. How do you tell an 8-year-old that 800,000 soldiers were mobilizing to find her dog? Because people care about you, sweetheart.
And, when someone in our family needs help, everyone helps. Emma considered this with the serious expression that meant she was processing complex adult concepts through her child's understanding of the world.
Even people who don't know me?
Especially people who don't know you, Sarah said.
That's what makes us human.
Outside their quarters, Kepler Station hummed with unusual activity. Emergency protocols activated as the station prepared for the arrival of humanity's battle fleet.
Cargo ships diverted to secondary approaches.
Passenger liners delayed their departures. The massive trading hub, designed to accommodate dozens of species simultaneously, began reorganizing itself around humanity's singular focus on one missing dog. In the depths of the station, in maintenance conduits that hadn't seen biological life forms in months, something moved through the shadows. Something golden and confused, following scent trails that led deeper into the mechanical maze of Kepler Station's infrastructure. Something that had no idea it was about to become the most sought-after creature in the galaxy.
12 hours after Emma Chen's tears first fell, Kepler Station had transformed into something resembling a military occupation.
The UES Devastator hung in space like a metal moon, its bulk casting shadows across the station's solar collection arrays. Around it, the rest of the 7th Battle Group maintained defensive positions that looked suspiciously like a blockade to anyone familiar with human military doctrine. Captain Rodriguez materialized in Kepler Station's main transporter bay alongside Commander Hayes and a full company of Marines. Station Administrator Quelek, a nervous Brinthari whose species resembled oversized mantises, waited to greet them with what passed for diplomatic courtesy among creatures whose ancestors had been ambush predators. Captain Rodriguez, Quelek's translator, rendered his chittering into flat standard. While we appreciate humanity's concern for Ambassador Chen's situation, this level of military response seems unnecessarily provocative. Rodriguez studied the administrator with the patient expression she reserved for beings who didn't understand the gravity of their situation.
Administrator, we have a missing child's companion animal loose on your station. From our perspective, this represents a failure of your security protocols that directly endangers a human dependent.
The animal is hardly in danger, Quelek protested. Our security systems are quite comprehensive. Your security systems, Commander Hayes interrupted, consulting his personal data pad, failed to prevent an unauthorized departure from secured diplomatic quarters. They failed to track the subsequent movement of a 70-pound biological entity through your station. And they've now failed for over 12 hours to locate said entity despite having detailed biological signatures and behavioral patterns.
Quelek's compound eyes swiveled between the two human officers.
Captain, surely you don't intend to search the entire station. We have over 4 million cubic meters of interior space, much of it in active use by civilian populations. Administrator, Rodriguez said with the kind of smile that made experienced enemies reconsider their life choices, we intend to search every cubic centimeter if necessary. My Marines are trained in urban operations, confined space combat, and hazardous environment recovery. Finding one friendly golden retriever on a space station should be considered light exercise. What Rodriguez didn't mention was that her Marines had also been briefed on Kepler Station's species manifest. They knew which of the station's inhabitants might view Buster as a potential meal, which ones might consider him a curiosity to be captured, and which ones were likely to help. More importantly, they'd been authorized to treat any interference with their search as a hostile action. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, commanding the Marine deployment, had made the parameters clear to his troops during their briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a missing family member. An 8-year-old girl is counting on us to bring her friend home. I don't care if we have to turn this station inside out and shake it until he falls out of someone's pocket. We find that dog. The Marines spread throughout Kepler Station with methodical precision. 3-person teams took responsibility for different sections, armed with biological scanners calibrated to detect golden retriever DNA, audio equipment sensitive enough to hear a dog's heartbeat through bulkheads, and enough firepower to discourage anyone who might object to their thoroughness. In the commercial sector, Sergeant Lisa Park's team questioned traders and shopkeepers with the polite insistence that marked professional military investigators. The diversity of species meant that her translation software worked overtime, but the message remained consistent. Have you seen this animal? Do you know anyone who might have taken this animal? Are you aware that interfering with this investigation constitutes an act of aggression against human interests? I understand your concern, the Altarian merchant told her, his tentacled head swaying in what the translation matrix identified as confusion. But surely one small creature cannot justify this level of response. My homeworld's entire defense fleet consists of fewer ships than humanity has deployed here. Park's smile remained professionally pleasant. Sir, in human culture, family members are irreplaceable. We don't measure responses based on size or economic value. We measure them based on how much someone matters to us. Meanwhile, in the station's lower levels, Corporal James Martinez led his team through maintenance conduits that most station residents never saw. The cramped spaces required single-file movement, but his team pressed forward with the determination of soldiers who understood that their mission's success would be measured by a little girl's happiness. Contact, his point man called out, raising his scanner. I'm reading biological traces consistent with Canis lupus familiaris, approximately 6 hours old, heading deeper into the maintenance section. Martinez felt a surge of optimism. 6 hours wasn't that long in the life of a lost dog. Buster could still be alive, still be recoverable, still be returned to Emma Chen before permanent psychological damage occurred. The team pressed forward, following the scent trail through passages that grew progressively narrower and less maintained. Above them, in Kepler Station's administrative center, a crisis of a different sort was developing. Admiral Morrison had arrived aboard the heavy cruiser Indomitable, and his presence had transformed what Administrator Quelek hoped would be a brief military visit into what increasingly resembled permanent occupation. Admiral, Quelek pleaded, his chittering translated with increasing desperation, your people are disrupting commerce throughout the station. We have traders threatening to take their business to Proxima Station. We have diplomatic missions filing formal complaints. The Corthanian delegation is demanding compensation for delayed negotiations. Morrison, whose weathered features had been hardened by decades of military service and interstellar politics, regarded the administrator with the kind of patience usually reserved for particularly slow cadets.
Administrator Quellick, let me explain something about human priorities.
We have a child who is currently experiencing trauma because her companion animal is missing in an environment where it could be injured, killed, or eaten.
Until that situation is resolved, your commercial concerns are irrelevant to us.
But, the economic impact will be significantly less than the impact of forcing humanity to permanently re-evaluate our relationship with Kepler Station's administration, Morrison finished.
I have 800,000 personnel currently dedicated to this search. I can have 8 million if necessary.
The question you need to ask yourself is whether finding one dog is worth more or less than maintaining favorable relations with the species that controls 60% of this sector's shipping routes. The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but Quellick understood the implications. Humanity might seem obsessed with individual welfare over logical efficiency, but that obsession was backed by the most powerful military force in known space. Cross them over something they considered important, and it would make their displeasure known in ways that affected entire star systems. In the diplomatic quarter, Emma Chen sat with her mother, watching the tactical displays that showed the search progress. Red zones indicated areas already cleared by Marine teams.
Yellow zones showed active search operations. Green zones awaited their turn.
The methodical progression would have been reassuring if it weren't for the growing areas marked in gray spaces where biological scanners detected nothing but metal and recycled air. "He's scared," Emma said quietly, her small fingers tracing Buster's collar.
"He doesn't understand why he can't find me." Sarah felt her heart break a little more.
Her daughter's empathy for her missing pet was both touching and heartbreaking. Emma wasn't just worried about Buster being lost, she was worried about him being afraid and confused, unable to understand why his family had disappeared. "The Marines will find him, sweetheart.
They're very good at finding things."
"I know," Emma said with the kind of faith that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture.
"Uncle Marcus promised they would."
Sarah smiled despite her worry. Lieutenant Colonel Webb had indeed made that promise, and, from what she knew of Marine Corps culture, he would consider it a sacred oath. The idea of having to face an 8-year-old girl and explain why 800,000 soldiers couldn't find her dog was probably more terrifying to him than most combat situations. Deep in the station's infrastructure, far below the levels where most biological entities ever ventured, Buster padded through corridors that hummed with the vibrations of massive machinery. The golden retriever's keen nose detected thousands of scents, lubricants and heated metal, recycled air and ozone from electrical systems, and, somewhere, faintly, the familiar smells that meant home and safety and the little human who gave the best belly rubs. He paused at an intersection of maintenance tunnels, his tail wagging hopefully as he tested the air currents. The scent trail led in two directions, confusing his simple understanding of how to get home. One path smelled like Emma, faint but definitely her scent mixed with the chemical markers that meant their quarters on the station. The other path carried the scents of many different beings, some of which triggered instinctive wariness in his ancient canine brain. Buster chose the path that smelled most like Emma, his paws clicking against metal grating as he headed deeper into the station's bowels. He had no way of knowing that Emma's scent was being carried through the ventilation system, creating false trails that led away from the diplomatic quarter rather than toward it. His simple canine logic told him that following the strongest scent would eventually lead him home. Behind him, Corporal Martinez's team pressed forward through the same maintenance tunnels, their scanners detecting the biological traces that Buster left with every step. But the narrow confines of the maintenance system slowed their progress, forcing them to move in single file through passages barely wide enough for humans in combat gear.
"DNA traces are getting stronger," the team's medic reported.
"He's definitely been through here recently, probably within the last 2 hours."
"Good," Martinez replied. "Keep pushing. We're going to find this dog and get him home."
In the commercial sector, word of the human search operation had spread through the station's population with the speed of gossip and the impact of a meteor strike. Species that had never paid particular attention to human psychology suddenly found themselves fascinated by the concept of deploying military assets to recover individual family members.
The Verkani delegation, crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonance, struggled to comprehend the human response within their logical frameworks. Their cultural attaché, a geometric entity named Resonance of Perfect Logic, consulted with colleagues about the implications. Analysis suggests humans prioritize emotional attachments over resource efficiency, one colleague observed through carefully modulated tones. Confirmed, Resonance of Perfect Logic replied. However, this priority structure may indicate tactical advantages in alliance relationships. Humans who respond this way to individual welfare would likely demonstrate similar commitment to allied species. The observation rippled through Verkani diplomatic channels with the kind of significance that would influence policy decisions for generations. Other species reached similar conclusions, recognizing that humanity's apparent irrationality might actually represent a form of strategic thinking that prioritized long-term relationship building over short-term resource optimization. In the Corthanian embassy, military attaché Sathek studied the tactical deployment reports with professional interest. His reptilian features, evolved from predators who had once ruled their homeworld's food chain, showed what his species considered approval. The humans demonstrate pack loyalty to individual members, he observed to his staff. This behavior pattern indicates strong social cohesion and willingness to expend resources for group welfare. Such species typically exhibit excellent alliance reliability. His aide, a younger Corthanian with less experience in interspecies military analysis, expressed confusion. But surely this response is inefficient? 800,000 soldiers for one small animal? Sathek's laugh was the sound of scales scraping against stone. Efficiency is for prey species who cannot afford to protect their young. Predators understand that the willingness to fight for one of your own sends a message to everyone else about what happens when they threaten your pack. Back in the depths of Kepler Station, Buster's journey through the maintenance system brought him to a junction where multiple tunnel systems converged. The space opened into a larger chamber filled with atmospheric processing equipment, creating the first area in hours where he could move freely rather than squeezing through narrow passages. His golden coat was dusty and matted from hours of crawling through maintenance conduits, but his spirits remained high. Dogs, particularly golden retrievers, possessed an optimistic nature that treated every new experience as a potential adventure. The fact that he was lost on an alien space station bothered him less than the fact that he couldn't find Emma to share the adventure with her. He explored the chamber methodically, his nose cataloging scents while his ears swiveled to track the various mechanical sounds that filled the space. Somewhere in the complex symphony of hums and clicks, he thought he heard something familiar, voices carrying the tonal patterns that meant human speech. Buster's tail began to wag with renewed enthusiasm. Humans meant safety, warmth, food, and, most importantly, the possibility of finding Emma. He followed the sound through another maintenance tunnel, this one wider and better lit than the passages he'd been navigating. 2 levels above, Corporal Martinez's team reached the same junction chamber that Buster had explored minutes earlier. Their scanners detected clear evidence of recent canine presence, DNA traces, shed fur, and the distinctive paw print patterns that their forensics training had taught them to recognize. "He's close," Martinez told his team. "Really close. Spread out and check all possible exit routes from this chamber." What none of them realized was that Buster had already moved beyond their search perimeter, following human voices that would lead him to the one place on Kepler Station where his presence would create the maximum possible diplomatic incident. Buster's emergence into the Galactic Council's emergency session chamber could not have been more perfectly timed if a team of human military strategists had planned it for maximum psychological impact. The Golden Retriever, dusty from his journey through Kepler Station's infrastructure but still magnificent in the way that only Golden Retrievers could be, padded through a maintenance access panel just as Ambassador Vordhak of the Centauri Alliance was in the middle of a formal complaint about humanity's disproportionate military response. The chamber fell silent as every delegation turned to stare at the four-legged cause of the greatest military mobilization in recent galactic history. Buster, blissfully unaware of his celebrity status, performed the kind of full-body shake that dogs use to remove dust and restore dignity to their appearance. His tail wagged hopefully as he surveyed the assembled beings, his canine optimism suggesting that surely someone in this gathering could direct him to Emma. "By the crystalline matrices," breathed the Verkani representative, "it's so small."
Ambassador Kethrak of the Zephyrian Empire leaned forward in his specialized seating arrangement, studying Buster with the fascination of someone encountering a mythical creature.
This is the being that prompted humanity to deploy 800,000 soldiers? Buster, responding to the attention with typical golden retriever enthusiasm, approached the nearest delegation. Unfortunately, this happened to be the Corthanian military attaché, whose reptilian appearance triggered ancient canine instincts about things that might be dangerous. Buster stopped, tilted his head in the universal dog expression of confusion, and offered what dog trainers called a play bow, front legs extended, rear end elevated, tail wagging frantically. Sathek, the scarred Corthanian warrior who had spent decades studying military psychology, found himself face to face with humanity's definition of family. The golden retriever's complete lack of fear, combined with his obvious desire for social interaction, struck the reptilian officer as either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Possibly both. It demonstrates no territorial aggression, Sathek observed to his aide. Yet the humans consider it worth deploying battle fleets to recover. Fascinating. The emergency session had been called by several species concerned about what they termed humanity's wildly disproportionate response to a minor domestic situation. The Brinthari had filed formal complaints about disrupted commerce. The Altarians had demanded explanations for search teams that seemed more like occupation forces. The Centauri Alliance had gone so far as to suggest that humanity was using the missing animal as an excuse to demonstrate military power in what should have been neutral territory. All of their carefully prepared diplomatic protests seemed suddenly inadequate when faced with the reality of Buster's presence. The golden retriever represented something that most galactic species struggled to understand: the human concept of family extending beyond genetic relationships to include emotional bonds with other creatures. Ambassador Chen burst into the council chamber moments later, having been alerted by her security detail that biological scanners had detected Buster's presence. She stopped just inside the entrance, her diplomatic training warring with maternal relief as she saw her daughter's beloved companion safe and, apparently unharmed in the middle of the galaxy's most sensitive political space. "Buster," she called softly. The golden retriever's response was immediate and dramatic. His entire body began to wiggle with joy as he recognized Sarah's voice, and he bounded across the council chamber with the kind of enthusiasm that had been bred into golden retrievers for generations. He reached Sarah just as Emma arrived, having run from their quarters despite protocol that required diplomatic dependents to remain in secure areas during political emergencies. The reunion between 8-year-old Emma and her missing dog created what diplomatic historians would later describe as a moment of unprecedented emotional transparency in galactic politics. Emma dropped to her knees and buried her face in Buster's dusty fur, her tears of relief mixing with his excited attempts to lick every inch of her face. The sound of her laughter, pure and joyful in a way that only children could achieve, filled the council chamber with something that transcended species barriers. "I thought I lost you," Emma whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around Buster's neck. "I thought you were gone forever." Buster's response was to increase his tail wagging to helicopter levels and attempt to climb into Emma's lap despite weighing 70 pounds. His doggy grin suggested that being temporarily lost was a small price to pay for such an enthusiastic reunion. Admiral Morrison arrived in the council chamber shortly after, accompanied by Captain Rodriguez and a full security detail. His weathered features showed the kind of relief that experienced military officers felt when complicated situations resolved without casualties. Behind him, Lieutenant Colonel Webb looked like someone who had just avoided the worst possible outcome of his military career. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison addressed the assembled delegates, "I believe we can now stand down from emergency operations." Ambassador Vorthak, who had been preparing to deliver a scathing critique of human military priorities, found his prepared speech inadequate for the current situation. The sight of a human child reunited with her companion animal had triggered unexpected emotional responses that his species' translation protocols struggled to process. "Admiral Morrison," Vorthak said carefully, "while we appreciate the successful conclusion of this operation, surely you must acknowledge that deploying 800,000 military personnel to locate one small animal represents a significant overreaction?" Morrison's smile was the kind that had been perfected in decades of diplomatic negotiations backed by overwhelming military superiority. "Ambassador Vorthak, let me clarify something about human military doctrine.
We don't measure the appropriateness of our response based on the size or species of the family member we're protecting. We measure it based on how much that family member matters to us. He gestured toward Emma, who was now sitting cross-legged on the council chamber floor with Buster sprawled across her lap, both of them looking supremely content. That little girl was heartbroken. Her family member was missing in potentially dangerous circumstances. From our perspective, 800,000 soldiers is exactly the right response to ensure her happiness and safety. The crystalline collective's representative attempted to process this through their logical matrices.
Admiral, surely you recognize the inefficiency of such resource allocation?
The economic cost of this deployment exceeds the GDP of several member worlds.
Economic cost? Morrison's expression shifted to something that made experienced negotiators reconsider their positions. Ambassador, what's the economic cost of an 8-year-old girl losing faith in her family's ability to protect what she loves? What's the strategic value of demonstrating to every species in this galaxy that humans will move mountains for our children's welfare?
Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her tactical analysis adding weight to Morrison's diplomatic points. Honored delegates, what you witnessed today wasn't just a search and rescue operation.
It was a demonstration of human values in action. We protect our own. All of our own.
Without exception, without compromise, and without regard for anyone else's opinion about whether our response is proportionate. She looked around the chamber, meeting the various optical sensors and compound eyes that represented dozens of species. Every military strategist in this galaxy now knows that threatening human families triggers responses that exceed normal military doctrine. Every diplomat knows that our emotional attachments aren't weaknesses to exploit but strengths that inform our alliance relationships.
Every trader knows that humans consider family welfare more important than economic efficiency.
Emma looked up from where she was scratching behind Buster's ears.
Why is everyone talking about Buster being gone? He was just exploring. Dogs like to explore.
The innocent question highlighted the fundamental difference between human and alien perspectives on the situation.
Emma saw a temporary separation from her pet, resolved by his eventual return.
The galactic community saw a military mobilization that had required the reallocation of resources across multiple star systems.
Ambassador Kethrak, whose diplomatic experience spanned several decades of interspecies negotiations, recognized the shift in political dynamics that Buster's adventure had created. Admiral Morrison, while we may question your methods, we cannot dispute their effectiveness.
Your search teams were thorough, professional, and respectful of station sovereignty throughout their operations.
Thank you, Ambassador, Morrison replied. Though I should clarify that thoroughness wasn't optional.
My Marines had orders to find that dog regardless of how long it took or where the search led them.
We don't abandon family members.
The statement carried implications that resonated throughout the diplomatic community. Species that had been considering humanity as potential allies found their interest significantly increased. Others, who had been evaluating humans as potential threats, revised their risk assessments upward considerably.
Sathak, the Corthanian military attaché, stood from his delegation's position. His reptilian features showed what his species considered profound respect.
Admiral Morrison, the Corthanian Empire formally requests expanded military cooperation agreements with humanity.
Any species that demonstrates this level of commitment to individual welfare would prove invaluable as alliance partners. Morrison nodded acknowledgement. We'll be happy to discuss expanded cooperation, Ambassador Sathak.
Though I should warn you that alliance with humanity means accepting our priorities.
We protect our friends with the same dedication we show our families.
Other delegations began expressing similar interest in closer relationships with humanity.
The Verkani Collective requested cultural exchange programs to better understand human emotional psychology. The Altarian Trade Federation proposed expanded commercial agreements backed by human security guarantees.
Even the normally isolationist Centauri Alliance indicated willingness to discuss mutual defense treaties.
Emma, still sitting on the council chamber floor with Buster, looked around at the assembled aliens with the kind of fascination that children showed when encountering new things.
Are all these people upset because Buster got lost?
Sarah knelt beside her daughter, diplomatic training helping her find words that would satisfy Emma's curiosity without requiring detailed explanations of interstellar politics.
They were worried about you being sad, sweetheart. And they wanted to understand why so many people came to help find Buster.
That's easy, Emma said with the confident simplicity that children brought to complex questions. People help when someone in the family needs help. Buster's family. So everyone helped.
The statement, delivered with absolute certainty by an 8-year-old girl, summarized human social philosophy in terms that transcended species barriers. Family wasn't defined by genetics or species compatibility but by emotional bonds and mutual care. Anyone who threatened those bonds faced the collective response of the entire human community.
Admiral Morrison made a note to include Emma's explanation in his after-action report.
Military strategists and diplomatic analysts would spend years studying the implications of humanity's response to Buster's disappearance, but an 8-year-old had captured the essential truth in 2 simple sentences. Lieutenant Colonel Webb approached Emma and Buster, his expression showing the relief of someone who had successfully completed an impossible mission.
Miss Emma, I believe we owe Buster an apology.
My Marines may have been a little too enthusiastic in their search methods. Emma giggled, a sound that seemed to ease tension throughout the council chamber.
Buster likes adventures. He probably thought it was fun having everyone look for him. Buster, hearing his name, looked up from where he was contentedly accepting attention from multiple species simultaneously.
His tail wagged in a rhythm that suggested complete satisfaction with the day's events.
From his perspective, he'd gone exploring, met interesting new beings, and been reunited with his favorite humans.
The fact that his adventure had triggered the largest military mobilization in galactic history was entirely beyond his canine comprehension.
Admiral, Administrator Quelek interjected, while we appreciate the successful resolution of this situation, the deployment of such significant military assets has created logistical complications throughout Kepler Station. Perhaps in the future, we could coordinate search efforts more efficiently?
Morrison's response was delivered with the kind of patience that suggested this conversation had been inevitable.
Administrator, let me make something clear about future protocols. If any human family member goes missing on your station, regardless of species, age, or circumstances, humanity will respond with whatever force levels we deem appropriate.
Your role in that response is to assist our search efforts, not to negotiate the scope of our deployment. The statement was diplomatic language for a simple message: human families were non-negotiable priorities, and anyone who interfered with their welfare would face consequences that extended far beyond individual incidents. As the emergency session concluded and delegates began returning to their respective embassies, word of humanity's response spread throughout the galactic communication networks. Military analysts studied deployment reports that showed how quickly human forces could mobilize and coordinate across multiple systems. Diplomatic services noted the psychological impact of humanity's willingness to prioritize individual welfare over strategic convenience. Trade organizations calculated the economic implications of aligning with or opposing a species that would deploy battle fleets to recover missing pets. Cultural anthropologists debated the evolutionary advantages of emotional bonding that extended beyond genetic relationships. But, in the diplomatic quarter of Kepler Station, the most important outcome was much simpler. Emma Chen sat in her family's quarters, reading a story to Buster while her mother completed the paperwork that would officially close the search operation. The golden retriever lay contentedly beside her, his adventure already fading into the comfortable routine of daily life with his favorite humans.
"Mommy," Emma said as Sarah tucked her into bed later that evening, "next time Buster wants to explore, can he wait until we're somewhere with better maps?"
Sarah laughed, kissing her daughter's forehead while Buster settled into his usual position at the foot of Emma's bed.
"I think we can arrange that, sweetheart.
Though I suspect Buster's exploring days might be limited to places where 800,000 Marines don't have to help find him."
Emma's sleepy giggle was the sound of childhood resilience reasserting itself after crisis.
Within days, the adventure would become a story she told friends. The fear and worry transformed into excitement about all the important people who had helped bring Buster home. Outside their quarters, the last of the human battle group was preparing to depart Kepler Station. Ships that had dropped everything to respond to a little girl's tears were returning to their regular duties, their crews carrying stories that would become legend in human military tradition.
The galaxy had learned something important about humanity that day. They protected their own with a dedication that transcended logic, economics, or strategic convenience. Family mattered more than efficiency.
Love trumped calculation. And anyone who threatened what humans cared about would face responses that prioritized emotional bonds over diplomatic protocol. Buster, blissfully unaware of his place in galactic history, dreamed dog dreams of maintenance tunnels and interesting smells, his tail twitching as he relived his great adventure. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, but tonight he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by his family in a universe that had just learned what happened when you lost one of humanity's beloved companions.
800,000 predators had deployed to bring him home.
In human terms, that was simply what family did for each other.